Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. It has been a couple weeks since, maybe 3 weeks since I filmed my last video, and I decided to name this series Angie's Tangents because whilst yes, it's me doing my makeup and doing something that I find a lot of fun in, I also just like going on tangents. I'm a yapper, what can I say? It's also been a week since I saw Benito in Sydney, and yeah, I just feel like life is worth living now, you guys. Like, that man, I love that man down. I love him. So yeah, so actually today's episode is gonna be quite interesting because I feel like lately there's been a really interesting movement or phenomenon in Indonesian pop culture, and I want to talk about it. There wasn't a specific moment or video that made me notice it, but rather it felt like it was a repeated exposure to women who weren't afraid to be feminine. Women who really played around with their femininity and who were unafraid to be, you know, playful, expressive, and lighthearted. And honestly, maybe the reason why I'm seeing it now is because of the fact that, you know, I'm older and I can analyze media more critically. But when I look back at how women were presented in earlier media, whether that be like 2000s or 2010s, femininity felt like it was often commodified through sexuality. How it was very clear that it was meant to appeal and meant to appease the male gaze. Now, what I'm seeing in pop culture feels very different to what I grew up with. Women are still playful and expressive and feminine, and it feels like they're performing for themselves, or even sometimes performing for other women. Naturally, I feel like there's a lot of experiences that are universal experiences for women. One of the main universal experiences is the girly experience, or the experience that we had when we were younger, and being unapologetic for being girly. If I had to point out one example of this shift in Indonesian pop culture, it would probably be Naikila's song called So Asu. And I feel like if you live anywhere in Indonesia, I feel like that has honestly become a movement of its own. It's become like a centil anthem and everyone listens to it. And honestly, seeing that kind of energy be so popular in society honestly made me feel something that I didn't expect, which was validation. Because growing up, I was a very, very, very girly child. Like, examples. I loved everything that was, you know, traditionally girly, whether that be makeup or heels or pink and fairies. And I literally remember my dad would always tell me that when I was 5 years old, whenever he would ask me what I wanted to be when I would get older, I would always say, "Aku mau jadi bidadari." And I think 5-year-old Angie was onto something, because I also want to be a bidadari when I grow up. So honestly, seeing women embrace that kind of femininity without shame brought back a lot of feelings of nostalgia for me. But more than that, it brought me a sense of camaraderie. Like, finally, there were other women who were fully embracing something that I had spent years trying to suppress or years trying to hide. So for my non-Indonesians out there, centil is actually one of those words that it doesn't really have a direct translation to English. It usually is used to describe someone who's, you know, playful, animated, maybe a little flirty, like very girly and princess-like, but not in a serious or a sexual way. It describes someone who's, you know, very lighthearted and bubbly and very much alive. But culturally, centil was never used as a neutral descriptor. It was often said as a warning or a cautionary tale. When I was younger, a girl would be called centil based on how she talked, how she dressed, and how she expressed herself. You know, girls who loved princesses, makeup, dressing up, that kind of thing. And when you're a child, it's not necessarily seen as bad, but when you get older, I feel like there's this expectation that you should grow out of it. That if you continue being centil as a teenager, people might misunderstand you. And the interesting thing is that most people participated in this narrative, whether that be, you know, aunts, uncles, parents, teachers, aunties. It felt like everyone naturally had this unspoken understanding of the expectations of that work. I remember my relatives actually telling my parents that they had their hands full with me because I was a lot more centil than my sister. And I don't think it comes from malicious intent, and I understand their concern. But it also meant that a part of my personality became a cautionary tale. As I got older, that label started to change, and that when I was younger, I was the centil one. But as I entered my teenage years, that language shifted into something that was a lot more heavier, which is the word ganit. And ganit carries an entirely different implication. It's no longer playful or lighthearted. It becomes accusatory. Suddenly there were more policings and more warnings, like, you know, be careful, don't entice boys, don't give the wrong impression. And honestly, the thing that made it difficult for me was that the fact that I didn't feel like people were actually seeing my intentions. I wasn't expressing myself for others, but I was expressing myself because that's just who I was. But when you're told something about yourself repeatedly, you start to internalize a lot of the beliefs, even if you initially didn't feel the same. From around the ages of 12 to 15, I wanted to prove to other people that I wasn't like other girls. I eventually threw myself into more things that were considered more boyish. I had an Arsenal jersey that I refused to take off. You know, I would tell people that I loved video games and that was my only interest. It was also the era of like soft grunge Tumblr aesthetics, and anything that was, you know, traditionally girly felt so embarrassing or cringe. And looking back now, I wasn't rejecting femininity because I didn't like it, but I was rejecting it because it made me feel a lot safer to be accepted by other people. Safer from judgment and safer from being misunderstood. During that time, I remember feeling that I lost my spark in a way. My lightheartedness felt dimmed. And like the person that I wanted to be and the person who I presented to the world felt like two entirely different people. When I reflect on it now, I don't think being centil was ever about morality. I think it was more about control than anything. Girls were often discouraged from being centil or expected to grow out of it because society wanted to regulate how girls behaved, and that was especially true when girls were around boys. That's why you often hear the phrase that, you know, girls had to grow up early because they had to be aware of how they were perceived. There wasn't this safe space for girls to just act freely or to experiment with their identity. And that pressure oftentimes made girls mask themselves. And at the same time, there was this double standard because boys weren't given the same expectations or pressure to find themselves early on. Like, I remember being a kid and hearing the fact that, you know, if a boy was teasing you or bothering you, that the adults in the room would always just say, oh, let boys be boys, or they'd say that it meant he liked you. And that kind of messaging is so damaging to the experiences of girls because oftentimes it teaches girls to internalize the responsibility for how boys behaved. It eventually taught girls that their own expression might be dangerous. So a lot of girls learn to shrink themselves and to be more digestible. Which is why I think for me, seeing this resurgence of centil femininity feels so significant and feels so healing. And the biggest examples for me are artists like, you know, Naikila or Nona embody this playful, expressive energy that feels unapologetically themselves. And globally, we're seeing a lot more similar archetypes appear, you know, or gain traction. Like Zara Larsson comes to mind, or Olivia Dean, or Tyla, Sabrina Carpenter, you know, women who represent the idea of being a girl's girl and unafraid of their own femininity. And if you listen to K-pop, you know that probably Chang Won-young from IVE is the biggest example of someone who fits the centil archetype to a T. And the last time I remember someone embodying this archetype in the West, and again, I could be wrong, I'm open to hearing opinions, but from my experience, the last person in the West who I feel like really embodied this archetype was a young Britney Spears, and that was more than 25 years ago. But the difference now is that these women don't feel like objects. They feel like people with interests, with opinions, with ideas, and with a personality. And their femininity isn't framed around male desire. It feels autonomous and independent and self-owned. They're allowed to be, you know, playful, lighthearted, and flirty without being automatically labeled as becoming sexual, unless they want to, which I'm all for. And even today, centil behavior still makes people uncomfortable. The easiest labels that people use to define these women are, you know, doing too much, or attention seeking, or pick me. And if you look closely, those criticisms always carry the same intonation or implication, and that is the idea that the woman must be doing it for a man. But that assumption in itself is the problem, because it removes women's autonomy. It suggests that women can't just be playful or joyful or expressive for their own sake. And historically, the interests of young girls have always been a point of ridicule. Maybe just because it hits a bit close to home, but hobbies, you know, that include fangirling, makeup, or fashion, and, you know, these days people have been saying like matcha or Pilates or anything that feels feminine has often been treated as something trivial. Like, I remember being a One Direction fan in the early 2010s and navigating the online space. I would always have been met with criticism or even shame from people who I literally don't know, and it was purely based on my interests. So that's why I feel like whenever a woman expresses joy openly, people always assume there must be an ulterior motive. But sometimes I think people forget that not everything is that deep, and not everything has to be deep. And sometimes a girl is literally just having fun. For me, reclaiming my centil honestly started when I reached my 20s, because that was the age that I started experimenting more with my appearance and style. And honestly, my intention wasn't to reclaim my centil, but it was honestly more because of the fact that I felt like I finally had control or autonomy in how I wanted to be presented to other people. I mean, I dyed my hair for the first time when I was 19. I've had my hair like ash, silver, blue, rose gold, red, like pretty much every color that you would see on a K-pop idol. And whilst I don't think I have the patience to maintain that again now, at that time it felt incredibly healing. It honestly felt like I was finally doing what younger versions of myself have always wanted to do. And for me, my centil energy shows up in things that I can control, like how I dress, or how I do my makeup, or how I cut my hair. But for me, centil energy also shows up in how I interact with people, you know? I want to be warm, playful, and lighthearted. And for a long time, I used to always resent small talk or conversations about surface level things because I just felt like it had no use. Like, I was always that type of person, like on the second date, to be like, okay, so what's your biggest insecurity? But I eventually realized that those small interactions or those small conversations are often how people connect, and that the human experience is so much more than our struggles, that there's already so much heaviness in the world that I don't want to add my sorrows or my struggles with people who I just met. And sometimes I feel like it's so important to also romanticize the little things. Reclaiming this part of myself has honestly made me feel more authentic and true to myself in ways that I didn't think was possible. It made me feel more connected with my femininity and more at peace with who I am. And whilst I don't believe that everything in life needs to be gendered, reconnecting with this playful and feminine side of myself really helped me feel whole. It also made me reflect on the women before me and how many of them oftentimes didn't really have the freedom or the luxury to explore their identities this way. So whilst I am living for myself and try to put myself first, I also remember that I'm also living for them. And it honestly makes me so proud to be a woman. and how I hope that if reincarnation exists, or if I were to be born again, I hope to be born a woman in every lifetime. So if a young girl watches this video, Indonesian or not, I want her to understand and always remember that her femininity is her superpower and that she doesn't have to be digestible for anyone else. I want to reiterate that, you know, femininity isn't a one-size-fits-all. It's something that we get to define for ourselves, and discovering who you are and what it means to you is a lifelong process. And even me at 25 now feels like my definition of femininity or centilness is very different to how I would have defined what it was when I was 21 or 22. As you get older, you'll keep meeting parts of yourself as you grow. So don't rush it, don't be afraid to explore, and don't be afraid of being called centil, because centil means confidence, joy, playfulness, lightheartedness. And sometimes reclaiming a word that was once used against you is exactly how you end up coming home to yourself. So that is today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for sitting with me and spending time with me. I hope that this video has somehow related to you in a way, or there is a bit of wisdom that you gain from it, and if not, I appreciate you spending your time with me. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share. I read all the comments. So yeah, so thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you again. Much love, and I will see you soon. Bye.